right, this next video, I had some few requests from friends of mine, especially the I can say nurses that are looking to go into nurse anesthesia programs, or nursing students that are looking at a career in nurse anesthesia. I thought this was a good video to kind of break it down to you what you need to do to prepare to go to anesthesia school. If you are a student, I want you to go into Google search and search any area that you want to go to school to. Look at anesthesia programs, look at their prerequisites and what is needed to apply into anesthesia school, because there's a lot of things that is required, and it varies from school to school. I can probably tell you your sciences, big thing, and every school requires, some school requires physics, some requires organic chemistry or biochem. Just look into specific schools that you want to apply so that you can start taking those classes ahead of time. Another thing, some schools require GRE, some don't. So if you are applying to one particular program, I normally tell students, just take your GRE. That opens a wider field for you, for many, because you cannot apply to one school. They take a very small percentage of applicants. Like the program I went into, we had over 200 applicants and they only needed 15 or 18 students. That's a very small percentage. Your chances of getting in to a program is, especially with their minimal requirements, is very slim to none. You have to almost apply to multiple programs to get in. So I normally say just choose at least 5 different schools, see what their prerequisites are, and start taking those classes so that you're more competitive. Do your GRE, it gives you options for more schools to apply into, and get into ICU. I know people normally ask, hey, does working in ER as a nurse count? No, most schools it does not count. Maybe 1 or 2 schools you might, but ICU seems to be a very across the board requirement for most schools. They say 1 year, but I'm going to tell you, most schools have high competition to get in, so you have to do more than 1 year in ICU. Try to get into ICU as soon as you can. If you look at my first video, that was some of the things I kind of talked about. But yeah, ICU experience is really, it's a requirement. It's not, even not, it's not an option. You have to get ICU experience. And when you get into anesthesia, you'll understand why you're required to have ICU experience. When you start taking care of a patient and that patient is in your hands and you have to take care of that patient by yourself, manage their blood pressure, all that stuff. It's very important, ICU experience. If you get to a surgical ICU, even better. Management of different vasoactive drips, those are very important things in anesthesia, because that patient you're going to be putting to sleep is going to be in your hands, and liability is major if you don't know what you're doing. Another thing I tell students, you have to do your CRNA. That is the critical care certification for nurses. Some schools recommend it but don't require it, but I'm going to tell you this, applying to anesthesia school is about points. So if you have more points, like if you have your GRE, you have your CCRN, you've had more than 1 year experience of ICU, you have a lot more core sciences than the other applicant, they're going to pick you over the other applicants any day. So just keep that in mind. Get your prerequisites out of the way before you even think about applying. Don't apply and say you're enrolled in a class, because we don't know what you're going to do in class. I do a lot of recruitment for one of our schools around here, and I get students that apply and they're like, oh, I'm enrolled in biochem, for instance. Yeah, I don't know if you're going to pass that class. How do I know that you're not going to drop out of school before the end of the semester? So make sure you get all those prerequisites out of the way before you think about applying into anesthesia school. So once you've gotten all your prerequisites, you've worked in ICU, you've gotten your experience, do your GRE. You don't do well, repeat that. Study for the GRE. Just get a good score, please. It makes it a lot easier when we are looking at a candidate who has got higher qualifications that has passed a GRE, and we don't have to find other ways to try to make them qualify, because there's a lot of people that are qualified to apply to anesthesia school. There's a lot of nurses that are trying to get into the program. So for you to be more competitive, you have to put yourself in a position where you're more competitive than the next person. Another big thing I tell people, try to be open-minded about where you apply school. Don't say, okay, I live in Arizona, there are only 2 programs, Midwestern and University of Arizona is the only one I'm going to apply, and that's it. you're kind of shortchanging yourself a little bit, because how many nurses in ICU in Arizona are applying into just those programs, and you haven't really considered the people that are trying to come from out of state into those programs. So if they're taking less than 20 students or less than 30 students, your chances of going into that school kind of diminishes a little bit. So have an open mind. Look at the schools out of state. Sometimes some schools will consider one student out of state, so they'll take one student from every state. That's your chance there. So apply to multiple schools. Maybe pick one or two from your state and then apply to schools in other states. Just look whatever school works for you. Expenses is a big thing. When you go to anesthesia school, you cannot work. Period. Nobody should lie to you about that. You might be able to work some period jobs here and there along the way during the program, but I'm telling you, once you start clinicals, most programs are front loaded, meaning you take your didactics in the first year, a year and a half, and then after that you're in clinicals. When you're working 40 hours a week and you have exams, there's no room for working. You cannot work as a nurse to supplement your income or to get enough money to sustain you during school. So plan accordingly. You can take student loans, but you also have to know that whatever student loans you're taking, if you take maximum student loans, you're going to pay for those student loans. So just try to limit the amount of student loans you're taking. And by that, you cannot have, let me tell you how you can kind of limit your expenses during anesthesia school, because that's the big thing, is just trying to limit your expenses so you don't have as much expenses when you're in school. Try to pay off your debts. Don't go in with credit cards. Bad idea. If you have a massive mortgage, not a very smart move. Maybe this is not the time to be buying a house prior to going to anesthesia school. Unless you have a spouse that's going to pay for that house, then hey, you're fine with that. Try to limit car payments. If you can work hard and pay off a car and buy a reasonable car that you don't have to make payments, that is an expense that you don't have to incur. You have to maintain or pay during anesthesia school, that you don't have to pay with your student loans. Because trust me when I tell you, you want to get out of anesthesia school with minimal student loans. And this is the reason why. For now, all the nurse anesthesia programs have gone to DNP. That sounds fun when you're thinking about, hey, I'm going to graduate with a doctorate degree. But think about it. Anything that is labeled doctorate level, your price per credit hour has increased. Okay, you're no longer paying a master's level fee, you're paying a doctorate level fee. On top of that, so now per credit hour, you're paying more than somebody that was doing it when they were doing the master's program. That is more student loans for you. Secondly, the length of time to graduation has increased. What used to be 24 to 28 months now is anywhere from 36 to 40 months. More time in school, more credit in school, you incur, more student debt, and less time, more time that you don't actually work and make money. So keep that in mind. So if you have less expenses, you don't have to borrow as much. So because school is going to be expensive as is, without even you adding your extra, mortgage and car payments and credit card payments. Just think about that. And then another big thing I tell people, just try to live within your means. If you go to a program, find the cheapest apartment, get a roommate, cut down your expenses. This is not the time to be, granted if you have kids, you have to do what you gotta do, but this is not a time to live a lavish lifestyle. I have seen people graduate from anesthesia school with $120,000 in debt. That is a very actually low minimum student. Just keep that in mind when you're trying to apply to anesthesia school, that you're going to come out with significant amount of student debt. 120 is on the low end. Okay, this is just I'm talking about, there's nobody that is helping you pay your regular mortgage or your regular living expenses. You're paying for all that. And I've also seen people graduate to close to 300. Okay, so look at it this way: you both graduate. This person that comes out with 120,000 gets paid exactly the same as you who graduated with close to 300,000. This is a true scenario. I have ed students because I'm in clinical science with students. I do a lot of orientation with students, and I talk to them. And somebody's like, oh, I'm about to graduate. We get into, how to graduate and start paying debts and stuff like that. And I get, hey, I have 120,000 in student debt. That seems quite a bit. I'm like, you know what? That's not too much. It's manageable. It's towards the lower end of a realistic student debt for anesthesia school. And then you get other students. They're like, hey, I have 280. You know how long it's going to take you to pay your 280 out of school? Do the calculations. You're going to get out of school, and the next 10 years, you're not going to make any more than you were making as an RN just because you have that much student debt. And one thing about student debt, you cannot bankrupt out of it. The only way to get out of student debt, let me put it this way, is if you die. That's it. You can't transfer. Even if you're married and you divorce, you cannot transfer your student debt to the other person. Keep that in mind. If you think your spouse is going to pay for it, if something happens to that money, you can't transfer that. That is your debt. You get to go to the grave with that. So just keep in mind when you're going to anesthesia school or applying to anesthesia school that limit your expenses, limit the amount of student loans you're borrowing, because you will have to pay for that. And then just do all your prerequisites, go to schools that you want to apply to, see what their requirements are to get into the program, and try to shadow at least a CRNA somewhere prior to applying to school. We like when we get an application for a candidate and they said, hey, I shadowed 1 or 2 CRNAs, I know what, because we will ask you, these are the questions we ask you when you come for interviews. Hey, have you shadowed a CRNA before? Do you know what you're getting into when you go to anesthesia? Because, you do not want to invest that much time and money into a program and not know what you're getting into. So we want to be sure that you, as a candidate, know what you're going into. Because we don't like attrition rates. We don't like us enrolling our students and a year later they're dropping out of school because they don't like it. Because anesthesia is not for everybody, I'll tell you that. There's some personalities that cannot survive in anesthesia, and that's why we have to vet them out. Besides, we have a lot of candidates. There are people that are more suited for it than others. So make sure you shadow, you have a list, and have a piece of paper for a CRNA to sign it, to show that you actually were physically in the OR. We recommend up to, I think, 16 hours, and that is 2 8-hour shifts to follow a CRNA, see what they do on a day-to-day basis, be able to interact with them and ask questions so that they can answer questions. There's a lot of challenges in that field that you need to know ahead of time, those CRNAs can be able to answer for you. For that, I think I've kind of answered most of the questions. I got that in one of my comments from one of my friends that I needed to do a video about getting into anesthesia school. I think this is going to cover it. If it doesn't, please shoot me an email directly or make a comment below this video and I will go into that. I can always make another video and answer some of those questions. Have a wonderful week and God bless.